What is your full name?
My name is Susannah Smith.
Okay. And do you care to divulge your age now?
Well, I'm about 15 days away from 65.
Okay. And where do you live?
I live in Virginia.
Okay. Did you have any nicknames as an adult or a child?
My family called me Susie, and I'm sure I had many nicknames, but I was never made aware of them.
Okay. Does the Queen of Sheba come to mind?
Well, the Queen of Sheba was my title for many years while I was at Ringling Brothers, Barnum Bailey, and there was a reason for that. At some point, and I can't remember, it was in the 80s, maybe 82, 81 or 82, Irvin Feld designated Arnold Bramo, his assistant, his executive assistant, as vice president of Ringling Brothers, Barnum Bailey. That summer, when they put the title or the credit page together for the ice show, it appeared that I reported to Arnold Bramo. And I said to Alan Bloom, who was my direct report, if Arnold Bramo can be a vice president of this company, I will be the Queen of Sheba. And proceeded to have my business cards printed with Susannah Smith, QOS.
What is the name on your birth certificate?
Margaret Susannah Gluck.
Okay. When and where were you born?
I was born in Des Moines, Iowa. I was a war baby.
Okay. Where did you live as a child?
I grew up in the state of West Virginia.
Okay. Would you describe your family as poor, middle class, upper class, wealthy?
My father was Dean of Students at West Virginia University, and I don't know how census would classify that. I know we never had any money, but we had a terrific childhood growing up in a university town.
Okay. What was your mother's occupation?
My mother was a homemaker. She had been a dietitian. She graduated from college, but mostly she was a homemaker.
Okay. What schools did you attend and where were they located?
I attended Morgantown High School in Morgantown, West Virginia University, University of Houston, graduated from West Virginia University.
Okay. Do you have any degrees, college degrees or certifications?
I do. My college degree is a Bachelor in Science from the College of Human Resources at West Virginia University.
Okay. Do you hold any postgraduate degrees?
I do. I hold no postgraduate degrees.
Okay. As a child, what did you want to be when you grew up? What did you think you wanted to be?
I had no clue what I wanted to be when I grew up, but my father later pointed out to me that he had asked me to be tested to figure out what my best choice for a career was, and the psychologist sent a letter back and said, these are your skill sets and this is where you would be good, and blah 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 blah. And my father later sent me a copy of the letter from the psychologist who said, guess what? You're doing exactly what Dr. Romano said you should be doing. You found the perfect job.
And what job was that? You said it was perfect.
This is so hard.
Just restate. And the job that Dr. Romano said.
Well, Dr. Romano gave a broad sort of swipe at where I would fit in the world of working, and in fact, when I became assistant to Alan Bloom and director of creative services for Ringling Brothers, Barnum Bailey, it was a very broad job description. It was whatever needed to get done, go do it, figure out how to do this. The first time Alan Bloom ever gave me an assignment, he called and said, you know, I need, what was it? Oh, I know. He needed hard hats that had the Ringling logo on it. And I said, that's no problem. When do you need them? And he said, well, I don't need them right away. And then he called back and he said, listen, I forgot to tell you, they need to fit elephants. And that's when I found out the average hat band of an elephant on the Ringling show was 42 inches. But my assignments went from the absolute mundane to the wildest things you can imagine. And it really fit who I am and my personality over time.
Okay. What was your first job ever?
My first job ever was working in a florist when I was in college.
Okay. How did you find out about a job with Ringling Brothers?
When I graduated from college, I moved to Houston, Texas. My first job was with an advertising agency in Houston. That agency represented the Astrodome, Judge Roy Hofheinz. Through that relationship, the agency met the brothers Feld from Washington, D.C., who were promoting the bullfights in the Astrodome. And through that association, the agency became the broker for all the printing for Ringling all over the United States. And I eventually took over that account and managed all the printing. So for every specific engagement, there was specific printing done, whether it was window cards, one sheets, stuffers, heralds, flyers, mailers, billboards, all of that I managed. So very quickly I knew pretty much what was going on in every market for Ringling all over the country. But more importantly, I first saw the circus in 1969. It was my first experience, and I was absolutely, completely dazzled. I could not get enough of it. It absolutely fascinated me. It was just a religious experience for me, and I couldn't get close enough to it. It took a long time, but I eventually did come to work for Ringling.
Okay. And what was the interview process like when you joined Ringling?
Well, because I had a close association with Ringling through my account work with the agency, I ended up in numerous conversations with Alan Bloom about eventually coming to work for Ringling. And the first really long conversation was in 1974, and I flew to Washington. Well, the night before I was leaving to go to Washington, my husband, who was then with Exxon, was told that we would probably be transferred to Saudi Arabia. So I got to Washington and said, gee, Alan, this is a great idea, but I might be in Saudi Arabia. So we tabled it. But in the meantime, I had been promoting the Ringling date in Houston. So I pretty much stayed involved on a daily basis anyway. So it worked, and I was doing a lot of special projects for Alan at that time. He needed something done, I would do it. It wasn't within the scope of the printing contract. But then in 1976, he said, well, you really need to come to the winter meeting. It was in Puerto Rico. And on Sunday, we had lunch, and he said, I've got this thing. We have to pitch a sponsorship to Borden. I need you in Washington on Monday. And this is Sunday. I had to go back to Houston and then fly to Washington. So I called the gentleman that I worked for, who was a very close friend of Alan's, 80 Marks, and said, gee, 80, I'm not going to be at work tomorrow. I'll be working for Alan tomorrow. I'll be in Washington. And that's how it happened. It wasn't exactly an interview process. I've been working for Alan anyway.
Okay. So you just transferred to a different payroll?
Exactly.
Okay. We're going to deviate a little bit here because we talk about the marketing and a promoter job, and I'm just going to ask you this in a different context. You became involved from the printing perspective, and you moved into basically promoting Houston
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I did
And
for
how
my
did
use.
that happen, and what do you kind of remember about it from that years before you got involved in creative services?
I think through the printing, I'd always been involved in the creative services side simply because dealing with the artwork, dealing with design, putting things together, and being concerned about the brand, as it were. I think the first person who really gave me a vision for the brand was from Michael Rosenberg, who was the promoter at the time who came to Houston, and he had sort of gotten the religion, if you will, the brand religion, as it was conceived by Irvin Feld. And Irvin had a very, very laser clear understanding of what Ringling Brothers Barnum Bailey was as an entertainment entity as well as a cultural entity in the United States. And it was crystal clear what Ringling was, what it meant to this country, what its place in history was. And I think that really stood in my head for the past 40 years. But one year, I think 1972, Jerry Kreml, who was then the national press agent for Ringling, didn't come to Houston, and Michael said, well, you're going to have to do the PR this year. And then I got involved in the show, in the promotions and making sure that things happened. I had learned about ticketing through another client of the agency. Had worked in box offices, so that piece was already, I'd already done that learning. And eventually, then David Rosenwasser came. He was an incredible mentor and teacher. I learned a huge amount about constructing a campaign from David, and eventually I just started doing it myself. And it made some sense because I was there all the time, and because I was already somewhat related to the company. They allowed me to be I think I was the first person who promoted a date for Ringling who did not work for Ringling directly.
Okay. And reflect a little bit for me on, you said that Irvin had a crystal clear thing in his mind about the brand and what it should be and what it should represent. Articulate that a little bit more in detail of what you felt were a direction, a path, a brand identity. Irvin, my belief was that Irvin saw Ringling as an integral part of the warp and woof of the American experience. And he wanted it to be as shiny and beautiful and extraordinary as that experience is the first time you see it, every time that you see it. There was his notion of color, of the extravaganza value of it. You couldn't see that anywhere else. There was nothing else like it. And it was a precious thing to be cared for, and its reputation meant everything to Irvin. And I think he did everything in his power to make it as important in the entertainment lives of Americans as he possibly could have done. Okay. Who was the person that had the most positive influence in your work while at Feld? Who were they and what did they do?
And there were so many people.
But if there was one person.
If there was one person who had the most influence over what I did in my years, it was Alan Bloom, who gave me the running room to go, to explore, to try different things, to find different ways to build great branding programs and to build great PR programs, build marketing programs, build materials, if we could think it up, we could do it. And so we were able to do extraordinary
media events, extraordinary programs like the new baby program. That was Alan's idea. It was my implementation, but it was Alan created, and I think Kenneth and Irvin too, created an atmosphere where if you could think it up and it made sense, you could build a case for it, you could do it if it meant that it built the brand and it built business overall. And so I think that sort of openness to change, openness to change and openness to new and the novel and the never before seen, as long as it fit the brand and it was appropriate to the brand and kept the promise of the brand, they were willing to try. And so we were able to just do amazing things in my career.
You worked on 10, 15, 20 creative campaigns and numerous iterations of those campaigns over the years for Ringling Brothers and then obviously the other properties, but concentrating primarily on Ringling. If you could name 3, 5 campaigns that stand out on the top of your head as being the apex of your creative abilities and how you interpreted the brand, what would they be? Over the years,
I think that over the years, I think that the campaign that I most think about as being the culmination of a lot of learning would have been the I can't think of the date, but it was celebrating 200 years of circus in America. And we sort of brought everything, all the market research we had been able to do, all sorts of resources that we had sort of pulled together over time into one really focused campaign. And that's where we coined the line, America's Living National Treasure. We had, along with that, we had the program that we did together with the U.S. Postal Service. We brought 4 U.S. postal stamps to life. Jim Ragona, the ringmaster, became the living vision of that stamp. The aerialist became the living vision of that stamp. It turned into a 2-year promotion. But we pulled so many other pieces together from throughout the time that I was at Ringling, that all came together in that particular campaign.
Okay. It's been said that the Ringling Marketing Group, promoters and marketing creative services such as the roles that you worked in, were close-knit and were almost tribal. People kept in touch over the years and maintained relationships. Was this your experience?
I think it was more than tribal because we grew up together. We went to each other's weddings. We saw our children being born.
I think the experience was...
I'm sorry. Start again.
Okay, go ahead. Roll again.
From my perspective, the experience at Ringling was almost familial. We grew up together. We learned together. We had tragedies together. We saved each other's asses. We covered each other's in 100 ways that you would never do in a corporation or a publicly held corporation. We saw our children being born. We celebrated together, and most importantly, we celebrated. We knew how to celebrate together, and we celebrated together. I think that's maybe the tie that binds, is that we did know how to celebrate together.
Okay. What lessons did you learn from the Feld experience that you have taken with you after you transitioned from Feld to the outside world?
I think the biggest lesson I learned in my experience at Feld Ringling was nothing beats a failure like a try. And that one thing has held me in such amazing stead over the years in every aspect of my life.
Tell me a little bit about some of the things that you've done since leaving Feld. I mean, it's been a pretty diversified palette. Can you describe some of the positions you've held and just sort of how that's rolled since leaving?
Since leaving Feld in early 1997, I have had a myriad of experiences and work experiences. I took some time off. I was president of a civic association for 2 years. I got back in touch with my family. I worked for a dot-com right in the dot-com boom, which was my first experience with a startup, and having come from a 30-year-old company to a startup is a really big change. But everything that I learned at Feld has been applicable in a lot of different, many different ways. After the dot-com, I went to work for Tony Robbins for a year. And Tony's his own religion, extraordinary person. I always wanted to live in La Jolla, having been there because I had been with Ringling. And it was my opportunity to do that. Learned a lot about myself. Since that time, I have been in the business of legal technology. Nothing related to anything I ever did with Feld, and everything that I have done has been related to what I did with Feld.
Do you feel that you've have enough money to live comfortably?
I'll never have enough money to live comfortably, but I'll always be comfortable.
Have you ever won any special prizes or awards as an adult that you'd care to share with us?
I can't think of any. I think that the big prize in my life has been my friendships with the people that I grew up with at Ringling. They have been enduring friendships all these years, particularly with the promoters, and those relationships have been more important than my high school relationships, my college relationships, or any other part of my life. They're the ones that I value the most, and that's my big award.
We're going to do some retrospective things here. What were the hardest choices that you ever had to make? And do you feel that you made the right choice at that time?
The hardest choices I ever had to make. One of the hardest choices I had to make was when Alan said that I needed to move to Washington. Really didn't want to move to Washington. I loved Houston. I loved the independence of not being on the firing line every day, and yet being in the office at headquarters was a huge challenge, and it was extremely close to the flame on a pretty much 24/7 basis, but it also was an extraordinarily exciting time to be there and be on the inside when Ringling, the Feld family, repurchased Ringling from Mattel. Unbelievable experience. In business cases, you don't see where a divestiture would happen in 11 days, and that was just the most amazing, pull it out of your hat, wonderful, incredible, and rewarding experience. But also a lot of other little things. I learned a tremendous lot about business. We were selling sponsorships, and you had to learn a lot about other businesses to do that over the years. And right when I moved to Washington, we had just signed the deal with Disney, so I was the marketing liaison between the Disney licensing and the Feld organization. That was a whole other education. Things like program books. Don't think that if I had made that choice to come to Washington, I would have been responsible for program books, or all the other things that eventually came my way to say grace over.
Was there a person that really changed the course of your life by something that they did? Who were they and what did they do?
Yes. The person who changed my life probably doesn't need a name, but here's the scenario. When I first started promoting in Houston, I had never been around circus fans. I didn't know what that was, and there were people that would be milling about in the back, and I'm like, well, they're not supposed to be here, and who are they? And I eventually got to know someone. There was a young couple. They had a baby in a stroller. She looked like Cher. She was gorgeous, beautiful, long black hair, open midriff. Her husband worked for Foley's department store. And okay, so the next year rolled around, and there they were again. And the next year, I needed someone to drive a clown, and so I thought, well, I'm going to call that girl to see if she's doing anything. She's a mother. Maybe she has time to, her kids are in kindergarten by now. Maybe she has time to drive the clown. And her husband said, oh, she's not here. She's gone to Dallas. The Red Show is in Dallas. Okay. Well, after the show left Houston, her husband called me to say, I'd like to stop by your office. And I said, fine, anytime. And he came with a Gloxinia plant and a Sister Corita Kent poster and said, I want to thank you for being so nice to my wife. She was killed last week and you were so kind to her. I had never been kind to her. I had barely ever even recognized that she existed. And it was galvanizing for me. It was absolutely a galvanizing thing to happen, and I still think about it to this day.
Do you remember someone saying something that to you that had a big impact on your life? What was it? Kind of a similar kind of question, but maybe you can take it in a different way.
One of the things that I remember someone saying to me was, I was in Dallas for the circus, and I was hosting the chairman of a major advertising agency in the United States. And somewhere in the middle of this, I was giving him a play-by-play of the show and background and all the things that I love to do when I'm watching the show. And he said to me, I have a question. And I said, what's that? And he said, is there life after circus? I didn't know the answer then. I found out that there is life after circus.
What has been the happiest event in your experience with Feld? What was the happiest time, event, anything you can point to?
There's so many happy times. The day we repurchased the circus from Mattel, the taking the show to the U.S. Capitol, the postage stamp promotion, the Living Unicorn, that press conference. Can you imagine that press conference? It was incredible. I mean, we had every major media there at that moment. It was just extraordinary. I still think about that. But it's all the little things. It's the high wire walker that brought you coffee in the office, and running to the building when you thought that it was going to flood at 2 o'clock in the morning because of a rainstorm, and there's Gunther worrying about the same thing. There are many, 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 many wonderful, happy experiences. Too many to tell.
Okay. What was the saddest moment in your experience with Feld?
For me, I think the saddest moment was the realization that the organization as I knew it was going to change, as it should change, as it needed to change, and that many of us who had come along the way would not be part of it. And on the other hand, it was a really good thing too, because I said to Kenneth last night, I'm incredibly grateful for the time that I spent there. It's an extraordinary place to be, and I couldn't have been more fortunate. And on the other hand, I couldn't be more fortunate not to be there now. My other life has been extraordinary, and I'm equally grateful for that. And I think that's it.
So you had a bittersweet kind of recollection of all this.
I think that when you really, when you dig deep down and you really think about it and you really want to be honest with yourself, what you remember all the good things, and there were so many good things that were so overwhelm anything that was a challenge, that it's simply, you're so grateful that you had something that nobody else had. Nobody else had that.
What's the most amazing thing that ever happened to you?
Joining Ringling Brothers Barnum Bailey by a long shot.
The
most amazing thing for me ever was joining Ringling Brothers Barnum Bailey. That was just, I was a kid from West Virginia. What did I know?
What was the most stressful experience you ever lived through, and was there anybody that helped you get through it?
The most stressful experience, I think, was the train wreck in 1994. That seemed to me to be probably the worst of all times, and on the other hand, it was the best of all times, because everybody pulled together as one single entity. Kenneth was amazing, the way he pulled everybody together, got everybody going again. Everybody was there to help everybody. There was no theirs and mine. It was all ours. It was our show. It was our friends. It was our people. There was no distinction whatsoever. It was an amazing thing.
What advice would you have for future generations, if you could provide that?
If there's any way to be close to Ringling Brothers Barnum Bailey, do it. Just
The advice.
do it.
The
My
advice.
advice would be to do it.
Okay.
If you can join it, if you can be around it, if you can get to know it, if you have any opportunity to be a part of what I think is America's living national treasure, absolutely do it.
Susie, if you could go back and change anything, what would it be? If I could.
If I could change anything, I really wouldn't change anything. The way it all played out was perfect. It was good. It was, if I changed anything, it wouldn't be anywhere near as spectacular as it absolutely was.
That concludes our interview. This is February the 12th, 2011. Susannah Smith interview.